Hi there folks, in today's demonstration I'm going to show you how I created this PDF file in Power Automate using non-premium actions. So there is a feature called Office Scripts where we'll write a script today that will populate an Excel file, and we'll then be able to turn that Excel file into a PDF using the OneDrive for Business actions. Now this particular PDF file has dynamic content. You'll see there that I've got my name, I've got my title, date of birth, address. All this data can potentially come from an external source, a triggered form or a Power App, and then you can create this lovely looking PDF using today's solution. Now if you haven't already, please make sure you've liked and subscribed, and without further ado, let's jump into the demonstration. So here I am in my Excel template file, and you'll see that I have a series of fields looking for data. I've got the surname and first names, title, address, and then some more examples here of string fields and also yes/no boxes. And so we're going to complete them dynamically using an Office script, and I'll show you how we can build that using the recorder tool. But for now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to jump into Power Automate and show you my flow. And you'll see that I've based this flow on a trigger, a manual trigger in fact, but you could be, of course, collecting data from a Power App and then passing the data into this scope that we have beneath here. You could also be using the Microsoft Forms, and when a new form submission has been received, or potentially you could be basing it on a list item within a SharePoint list. Now what I do here within this solution is I first of all get the file content of this file that I've just demoed you, and the purpose of that is to ensure that the original file is not overwritten. I then create a copy of that file, and I'm simply giving that a date timestamp using format date time and ensuring that I have that file extension at the end. Then I'm running the Office script, and it's with this Office script that we can pass all our parameters. So at the moment all of these strings and dates are fixed, but of course if you're using one of those other triggers, you could collect data from another source and pass in your dynamic values into this script. Then what I do is I convert the file. So this script will run on the copy of the file that we've created, and I'll then convert that file into a PDF. And then we've got two options. We can either send that file as an attachment, which is what I demonstrate here, and if we go into advanced options, you'll see that I have again a format date time so that I get a unique file name and the extension .pdf, and then I'm simply taking the body from the action above. Now what I wanted to demonstrate here was the fact that whilst I do create a file in the next action, I'm doing it after the send an email action. So if all you want to do is to send an email with a file attachment, you do not need to create that file at all. But of course, if you want a copy on either OneDrive or on SharePoint, you can go and use one of those two create file actions. Now what I'm going to do now is to stick this flow into test mode, and within hopefully 10 seconds we will have an email with a PDF containing those values that we saw in the Office script action. So I'll just expand that scope there. We can see that the script has run, and I've just had my email ping. And if I go into my email, we can see I have that attachment there, and I have those dynamic values. So you can see I have my name, I have my title, my gender, my date of birth, and then my address has been completed too. And also I have examples of, like for instance, the yes/no, it's only ticked the no, and then subsequent pages here with more dynamic data based on what was provided in that Office script action. So there we have a rather neat looking PDF using that template from Excel. So how did I actually put that together? So if I jump back into OneDrive where I have that template Excel file created, you'll see that I have the original file that I've been using in that Power Automate flow, but I've also created a copy of that same file so that I could do my Excel Office script recording. Now if I open up that file, you'll see that I have my template, and it's via the Automate tab at the top here that we create our script. And for my script today, I used the recording tool. So if you click on the Record Actions tab here at the top, you'll see that it opens up the ability to record various actions. I'll just resize it here, and all I need to do is start completing this form. So I'm going to type in the word surname in the surname field and first name in the first name field. And then in each of these boxes, I'm going to put in the respective word for each of the titles. So Mr, Mrs, Miss, and Ms. Now, if you're thinking at this point, what on earth is he doing? Well, the reason I'm doing this is it will make it a lot easier when I look back at the code to understand what's been captured in the recording. Now, I can do the same with all the other fields here. I can put in, for instance, address line 1. I can put in additional address. I can maybe insert post town and also email. And by doing so, you'll see on the right hand side here we have all these various actions captured. Now if I stop that recording, it will open up the recorded script and we can go into edit, and then I can have a look at the contents and see if we can make some sense of what's being captured. The first thing that I noticed when I was building my script is it's not very good at capturing the contents of a merged cell. And you'll note here that I have a rather weird looking array here with surnames throughout it for each of those cells. Now ideally, all I want to do is to put that value into a range, and we can simplify this first expression here by looking at the expression beneath us. So this one here, where we've put in Mr, and indeed Mrs and Miss and Ms, is how we want to construct our expression for the surname and the first name based on a range. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this highlighted text here using Control-C, and I'm going to paste that beneath. And the other observation I've made here is that we have a row number, which is 11 versus 12, and obviously surname's on 11, first name is on 12, so I'm going to make this Q11 so that we're only dealing with that one row, row 11. Now I can also see that surname runs from G to Q based on the merge that I've done, and again the range here is correct, it's based on G to Q, and then all I want to do is type in that command that we can see there, the set values, an open and close bracket, and in those open and close brackets I'm just going to put in the word surname, and you'll see that it's accepted that. Now I can actually then just get rid of this whole captured expression here, and then I'm going to copy this expression here and paste it beneath, and I'm going to make one change. So rather than dealing with row 11, we're now dealing with row 12, and in this I can put in first name. Now the great thing about Office scripts is that you can test these things within the interface we've got here. I can run this script at any point and see what data is saved or written to this file. So if I was to change the surname here to Bird and the first name here to Damien, I can then hit run, and you'll see on the left hand side now we now have Bird and Damien. Now equally, if I wanted to set the Mr and the Mrs and the Miss and the Ms to an X rather than the Mr, then I could put in an X. But what I'd like to do before I do that is to just update the comments here to remind me which of these values are for which of those titles. So I know that the first one is going to be Mr, because of course I put in the string Mr. The next one is Mrs. Then we have Miss, and we have Ms. And if I was to update these values now to X's, and I'm using a capital X for each of those, and if I was to run this script, if we watch on the left hand side here, those values have now changed to X's. Now the other range that I looked at was the address, and again you can see it's got it slightly wrong on two accounts. The first one is the address line 1 is from H to Q, yet the range here is from D to Q. So very much like our title, or our surname, sorry, and our first names, we can simplify those expressions by potentially just copying the one for the first name, pasting that below, and then getting the correct range. So we can see it's H to Q and it's 20. So if we go for H to Q20, and we can set the value of the address line 1 to an address in Aberdeen. Now if I get rid of all of this again and I'll hit the play button, I can see now I have that value address in Aberdeen. And if I want to do the same for the postal town, for instance, which runs from F to Q on 22, again I can copy that, paste it in and do F to Q, but of course this is row 22 and this is our postal town. Hit the run button and I can see that that value has successfully updated there on the left hand side. I'm going to delete this final value here, and basically what you need to do is, in order to build up your script, is you need to work your way through all of the different fields that you want to update so that you can then capture the data and pass it to your script from Power Automate. So this is very much just one part of the process here, building up the script so that we can pass dynamic values. But at the moment, these dynamic values are fixed. Postal town, address in Aberdeen, every single title is going to have an X in it. Of course, you want to be able to make that dynamic. So how can we go about doing that? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to introduce some variables at the top of our function. So I can put in a comma there. I'll stick in a couple of returns just so we've got a bit of space. And I'm going to create a variable called surname. And I need to define it as a data type or with a data type. So surname is equal to a string. So see there that I've put a colon and then the word string. And if we're going to have multiple variables defined, we need to put a comma in. And again, I could have first name, and that will also be a string. So because we have those two variables defined now, if we call this script from Power Automate, it will expect us to pass both a surname and a first name. And how will we pass those values into our script here? Well, where I currently have bird in quotes, I can simply type in surname. And again, if I remove Damien, I can type in first name. And now these values are dynamic based on the values that are provided via our script. Now if you're wanting to test, we can actually define the strings within the script, so we don't even need to worry about running Power Automate. So I could call this Bertie, and I need to put it into inverted commas because of course it's a string. And again, for our first name, I'm just going to put Mr. So we've got Mr. Bertie, and if I run that, if we watch on the left hand side, we can see that we've updated the surname to Bertie and the first names to Mr. So that allows us to quickly test that what we've created so far is working. We've got our variables as inputs, which will be part of the Office script. When we call that from Power Automate, it'll expect us to provide a surname and a first name. So the next thing within this script that we need to consider is how we're going to create some logic to determine which of these titles is ticked based on are they a Mr., Mrs., Ms. or Miss. And the same kind of logic applies here to our yes, no, where only one of these boxes is going to be ticked or crossed. So I'm going to create another string variable here, and I'm going to call it title. And again, it's a string data type. And I'm going to create what's called a switch. And you have the similar thing within Power Automate. So the idea is it will look at the title value here. We need to have an open bracket and a close bracket, which is created automatically. And it's based on all of the cases. So we type in the word case, we type in the double quotes here, and then we put in each of the string values. So the first one being Mr. with a colon. And then we need to select the expression that will be run based on the case being Mr. So I've highlighted the expression here, I'm copying it and pasting it in, and that will mean that if a Mr. is detected, an X will be put into cell B4. Now the other thing we just put in here is a break, so that that switch doesn't keep running. and then we'll do our next case. And our next case is based on misses. And then we will again grab that expression from beneath, copy that and paste it, and again insert our break, and so on. And so we do that for the other two values here, and that would allow our logic here to play out such that when the title is equal to Mr. and X is put in B14, if it's Mrs, E14, and then of course H and K. Similar logic for this yes, no. You would have a switch based on a string called yes, no, and if it's equal to yes, then obviously you would put an X into cell F31, and if it was a no, you would put an X into I31. So now that we've covered some of the basics and how to use the recording tool, I'm actually going to jump out of this script and jump into one that I've prepared earlier. And we can see here that I've defined all the various strings, including the title, the text at the end, the date of birth, date, yes, no, and gender. You'll also note that I have these two objects defined here as customer and address, and these are known as interfaces. So if I jump to the bottom here, it's like creating an object that you'd have within a JSON array. So I have the value of first name and last name, and also within the address object I have the first line, second line, and postal town. And that just means that I can call these values here by using, for instance, address.firstline, address.secondline, and address.postal town. You could, if you want, just define them all as individual strings, but this is just a way of grouping similar things together or related things together. And the only other thing that's of real interest is I have used this expression here to split the date of birth into an array of numbers. So of course, if you look at this date of birth, there are individual cells here. So if someone was to provide a date, I'd want to split it up into individual numbers. So what I'm doing is I'm taking that date of birth that's passed to us, I am removing any forward slashes if they're provided in that string, and then I'm splitting them based on, well, nothing, which basically creates an array of numbers, and it means that I can call those numbers there by each of those integer indexes, which you might be familiar with if you're using JSON arrays in Power Automate. But it basically means the first number starts from 0, and then the second one is from 1, and so on. And all I'm doing is populating these ranges, G18 to H18, so those two cells there. I could do it as individual cells. This is just the way that the tool captured it when I was doing the recording. And that just means that we can populate these individual numbers into each of these cells. You'll notice I have some logic for gender, which, as I described in the last bit there, is very much like the yes, no. If the gender is equal to male, it puts an X in one cell. Otherwise, if it's equal to female, it puts it into the other cell. And if we scroll down, you can also see that I have that yes, no scenario. So there's our yes and there's our no, and the X goes into the respective cell. I have a little bit at the end that's just populating some dynamic data. Well, one string is actually fixed, but the other string is dynamic, and that's just populating the second and third pages within my sample file. So that's the basics of the Excel Office script, how to use the recording tool, and I'll make this script available for you to download so that you can see it in full and potentially extend it for your own use. So the next thing I'd like to do really is just to explain a bit more about the Excel template that I've created. You'll see here that it's all based on the row height and the columns width being identical. It's not so easy to set within the desktop client, so I'd actually recommend that you start your original file from Excel Online, and that just means that you can go into the column width here and set that to pixels, and there I've made that 20 pixels for the column width, and equally when I went to the row height, again pixels 20, so I know I've got quite a uniform cell there, and with those individual cells I've then merged, and I found it a lot easier to use the desktop client. So within the desktop client you can see that I've merged cells, simply doing that by making a selection here, right clicking, going to format cells, And then if I go into alignment, you can merge cells here. So that just creates the one cell. And I've done that in various places throughout the file, and that made it a lot easier for the formatting. I've also used, again, if I right click, format cells, some of the borders. So using some of the formatting here, you can see that I've put a line at the bottom of a cell to provide some of the formatting on the screen. And then some of the other features that I've taken advantage of within the desktop client, if I go into File here and Print and then Page Setup, I've actually gone into margins and reduced the top left and bottom and right margins all to 0.5, changed the header and footer to 0, and I've also centered those cells horizontally and vertically, and that sort of gives me the sort of uniform appearance of that PDF once it's been printed or converted. If you'd like to see how I can link this up to a Microsoft form or a list or Power Apps, please make sure you leave a comment below. Let me know what your potential use case is for, and I'll try and get back to you. And if you haven't already, please make sure you've liked and subscribed. Thanks very much for watching. Cheers.